fall into. Here, you will look at Rumi's poetry and you'll see that it's about flowers and spring and blossoms and orchards and fruit and pomegranates and beautiful creeks and rivers and love. And it's just beautiful love. And it's all just very happy, happy love. Happy, beautiful love, and birds are singing. Nothing wrong with that. But the temptation there is that if that's all we see, is to think that this is just a happy, sort of easy life of spirit where the birds are always singing and we always feel flushed in our cheeks and we're just happy. That's an overly romanticized and sentimentalized understanding of the spirituality that emerges from Rumi's poetry. What gets missed there is the grief, the longing. Rumi in his poetry speaks at length of grief, of heartbreak, of brokenness in his life, in his heart, of longing for the beloved, of absence. Because when we look at Rumi's poetry, we're seeing a vision of the divine and of the infinite that is in fact infinite. As much as anyone speaking language can appropriate or can capture it, he does. And so for finite people like us to try to envision and experience what Rumi is talking about requires stretching and expanding in ways that are painful. It requires us giving up traditional notions of God, traditional notions of the spiritual life. It requires us to give up things that we thought were true for a larger truth. It requires us to go out into the field, to use one of the images from his poetry, beyond right and wrong. I will meet you there. Those are scary things. And so the spiritual life, as it's explained by Rumi, is not just peace and sweet and birds and fruit and flowers. That's one face of it. But the other side of it is a very difficult path. And it's a path of commitment and rigor and difficulty and grief and discipline that is sometimes very exacting. So the danger here is of over-sentimentalizing and romanticizing his work, when in fact the portrait of spirituality that he's presenting here is one that's much more complicated and complex and nuanced than is often presented by Madonna or any of the others who appropriate him from outside a traditional spiritual perspective. So that's one danger. I would say a second danger is the danger of over-spiritualizing him and his work, over-spiritualizing it. Again, there's the language of gardens. Come to the garden in the evening. There are pomegranates and there's wine. And come, oh my lover. There's talk about the lover. And there's descriptions, physical descriptions of the lover's face and voice and lips and hands. Come and we'll drink the wine. Come and our love will be consumed in the garden. And so, beautiful metaphors. The danger here is to say these are only metaphors. They're not really talking about wine, because wine is bad. We're not really talking about physical love, because that's only to be okay in certain circumstances. We're not really talking, these are only metaphors. They're all spiritual metaphors, exclusively spiritual metaphors for even more spiritual things. That's over-spiritualizing. Rumi, in my interpretation and in the scholarly community's interpretation, is not a dualist. He is not someone who divides the world drastically into spiritual things and physical, the mundane things. He is someone who integrates them so that the spiritual can be found right here in the world as we are with each other, as we relate with one another, as we enjoy fellowship with one another, as we enjoy human connection with each other. And so this is a danger, to over-spiritualize him. The metaphors of the lover and wine and beauty and union and love and all those things don't work even as metaphors unless we acknowledge the reality of them in the mundane physical world. Rumi is not someone who gives us a spiritual vision that's just up in the clouds, not with its feet on the ground in the real world. It's not an esoteric, disconnected from the world type of spirituality, a kind of escapism. It's very much in this world, in the garden, in society, in relationship with us. And so we have to guard against these two dangers of romanticizing his work and sentimentalizing it so that the difficulties and the challenges of the spiritual life are obscured. And then also over-spiritualizing his work so that it becomes a way for us to escape the world where we are called to live and be in relationship and make a difference and engage in the world. So, those are two things. And I think you can find those tendencies and those dangers in lots of different interpretations of Rumi and applications of Rumi. So both of those things are things I think we need to guard against. Okay, three other things. And these, I will say, are three dimensions of the context of Rumi's work. The context in which his work emerges. And these are very important pieces of his work, and his work, I don't believe, can be understood and applied or practiced in any time, including the contemporary time, without properly acknowledging and staying mindful of these particular facets of the context of his work. The first of those is the context in which he is writing, which is 13th century Konya in Turkey, which is, many of you know where that is. It's just not quite maybe to the midway point. If you look at Turkey, sort of like this, it's, sort of more toward the central part of Turkey. Konya today is a thriving city, a very multicultural city, a beautiful city, full of roses. Every time I've been there, it seems like it's full of roses. His tomb is there, and it's, for some, a place of pilgrimage and respect, a beautiful tomb. In the 13th century, Konya was on the western edge of the Silk Road. And so Konya is a city where in the 13th century, when he's writing, there are not only Muslims there. There are Jews and Christians and Hindus and Buddhists and Zoroastrians and others, very much all traveling through. So it is a 13th century city that is in an area of the world that is predominantly Muslim, but it's a multi-religious city because of its location at the western edge of the Silk routes. So this makes Rumi a very special kind of saint. I'll call him a saint. Makes him a very special kind of saint. He is not only a Muslim saint. He is a Muslim, and I think we could call him a saint. But he is a world saint. He is a universal saint. He is someone who can be claimed by more people than just Muslims because of the way he writes. He writes very clearly in a way that is much more universal. He's not only a Muslim. It's a universal type of language that he uses, which is why Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and Jews and people from all over the world have found such resonance in their hearts by reading his poetry. It's because his poetry reflects that multi-religious, more universal kind of tone that is befitting a place like 13th century